Hi there, welcome to Unit 7. This unit is all about nematodes. So we are moving from the microscopic creatures that are unicellular to the microscopic creatures that are multicellular. Today we'll just introduce nematodes and I'll talk about some fascinating facts about these guys before we jump into the role of nematodes in soil restoration. So this gorgeous image from Shutterstock is that of a nematode that's been labelled with some either fluorescent dyes or has just been coloured, but they are very beautiful creatures even if they are not beautified. So I'll just introduce what we're going to be talking about in this unit, but basically today we'll define what nematodes are and introduce some fun facts about this group of animals. We'll talk about the soil functional groups, so the various types of nematodes that perform various functions in soil ecology. We'll talk about their role in nutrient cycling and how that benefits plant nutrition, and look at the interactions of nematodes with various other organisms in soil communities. We'll also examine the role of nematodes in soil health. On the right in the image you can see a genus called Monhistera and their family Monhisteridae, and the nematodes that belong to this family live in marine habitats, in fresh water, in soils, and also in mosses. This is an electron micrograph showing an example of a bacterial feeding nematode, and you can see its gorgeous mouth through which it sucks in bacteria. So unlike all the other organisms we have thus far learnt about, nematodes are actually multicellular animals. And they range in size from fractions of a millimeter, and this is why we need a microscope to view them, up to 8.4 meters, and this is a nematode that's been found in the reproductive system of sperm whales. Nema means thread in Greek. They are also called roundworms, and they are unsegmented unlike other worms. So oligochaetes, which are worms that are like earthworms, are actually segmented, whereas these guys don't have segments. Their body plan includes a tube within a tube. So basically, they have a cuticle on the outside, which is the outer body wall of the nematode. And then there is a fluid-filled cavity, and then the digestive tube. And this fluid-filled cavity is important as it provides hydrostatic pressure that allows the nematode to move. So instead of having a skeleton like we do or an exoskeleton like insects, their body is held up through a pressurized skeleton, liquid that is under pressure, and allows them to move in a wave-like movement in a sinusoidal wave fashion. There are around 30,000 described species of nematodes, but some estimates that are questionable suggest that there might be more than 1 million different species, and that is giant amounts of species of nematodes. So obviously they are super important in nature and they perform various roles, and therefore their diversity is just immense. They are in fact the most abundant animal on Earth, and they are aquatic in the sense that they need moisture to survive, and they inhabit oceans and water bodies, but also soil and other places. They are so abundant that 80% of all animals on Earth are actually nematodes, and that equals 60 billion nematodes per person. That's more than 1 million per meter square. That is incredible in terms of how many nematodes there are. They're everywhere, and because they're little, we don't see them, but they cover pretty much every surface of the Earth. All the way from tree canopies to desert to living in Arctic ice, hot springs, deep sea, anaerobic marine sediments. They even live 3.6 kilometers below ground, and a lot of them are parasites of other animals. That just shows you the sheer resilience of these animals. But 90% of nematodes actually live in top 15 centimeters of soil. We actually want to concentrate on those. So they hatch from eggs, but their life cycle involves 4 different larval stages where they molt their cuticle or the outer skin and grow a new one when they become larger. They also have this survival stage called the dower larva, and that's like the alternative 3rd larval stage, where they basically protect themselves from adverse conditions by going through a stasis stage, and we call this stage cryptobiosis. So basically everything in the nematode shuts down, all its metabolism, reproduction, everything shuts down, and the animal is able to survive in that strange, dormant stage, which can be revived. Interestingly, recently in 2003, there was a paper that came out stating that a particular species of nematode from Siberia has been revived after being frozen for 46,000 years. However, this is questionable and we don't know whether it's true. Some scientists are debating whether that number of years is actually calculated correctly, but it was published in a scientific journal. The bottom line is these guys can survive in the dower larval stage for extended periods of time. We identify different nematodes based on their mouth parts and decorations. So the feeding structures that they have in their mouths and also the various decorations that they actually have. However, given the number of nematodes and how small they are, really molecular techniques are the only sure way to identify nematodes to species level, and the morphological characteristics are only really used to group them into the specific feeding groups, which is useful in soil analysis. Nematodes are actually quite extraordinary, and a soil-dwelling nematode called Cyanorhabditis elegans, or C. elegans for short, is a model organism for many different types of genetic and biomedical studies, but also other studies, as we'll soon see. It is the first ever sequenced genome of any animal and has been the winner of the Nobel Prize 3 times, and that includes studies in programmed cell death, in RNA interference, green fluorescent protein discovery, which is a gene expression marker that's used. So a lot of these discoveries have been made thanks to this simple, but really not so simple, C. elegans nematode that is a very common soil-dwelling organism. Interestingly, human pilots lose consciousness at 4 or 5 Gs, and 1 G is the force of gravity at Earth's surface. So it's the gravitational force, a force that is necessary to overcome gravity. But when C. elegans is subjected to 400,000 Gs, it remains unaffected. And the reason why scientists are studying this is to see whether these nematodes can actually survive the explosion of volcanic eruptions, and can they be carried on rocks to seed other places of the Earth. And also when asteroids impact the Earth, whether the rocks that can escape gravity could actually land on other planets and contain nematodes on those rocks, and therefore introduce life to other planets. And this is a concept called ballistic panspermia, where there are theories that Earth has been seeded from outer space, and whether the organisms on Earth can also seed other planets with life. However, it's yet to be determined whether these organisms can survive the temperature, the vacuum, the cosmic radiation that they would be subjected to if they were to be exported on rocks that leave Earth and enter space. And could they actually even get to other planets? This really does still need more testing. The other interesting thing about nematodes is that they have 10 to 100 times greater detection of UV light than human eyes, even though they have no eyes. So that is another interesting fact. And they have really incredible ability to survive, besides being able to withstand 400,000 Gs. Some of them, such as the wheat gall nematode called Angelina tritisi, In its second stage larva, it has been shown to survive 32 years being sealed in a glass tube at low humidity and at fridge temperatures. When revived, it resumed activity. So that's pretty incredible for a small creature like that. And it just shows just how important they are. That when everything else is gone on Earth, nematodes are going to most likely survive, do their job, and resume the functions of the Earth. So they are very important organisms. This is why they are perfectly designed to be able to withstand pretty harsh conditions. Before we get into their role in soil ecosystems, I think it's worth a mention that many nematodes are very symbiotic with other organisms. Oftentimes, this relationship is based on parasitism, and many are obligate symbionts or parasites. That means living exclusively within other organisms. And many insect pathogenic nematodes live in insects and carry out their life cycle within insects. And this is great in a way because they serve as a biological control of what we call pest organisms. And there are many different taxa that are included in this group of nematodes. So the juvenile nematodes infect the insect's body cavity, so they get into the body of the insect. Many of them will release symbiotic gut bacteria, and this bacteria actually causes the death of the insect within 24 hours. And then 3 generations of nematodes can feed on that insect. Another way that nematodes can be symbiotic with various insects such as sweat beetles, sand beetles, bark beetles, carrion and dung beetles, burrower bugs, and fig wasps is that one or more nematode species, such as Rhabditina, which is pictured here, inhabit the nests or the burrows of these different insects, and they actually consume their waste. So they clean up the nest, they clean up the burrows, they eat excess food that's brought in, and also the feces of the animals, and just basically clean up. So they're like a little cleaning service. And thereby they reduce bacterial and fungal growth, so they help the survival of those insects. And then when the larvae of the insects need to move from those burrows or nests, the nematodes will hop on them and then will inhabit the new nest that these insects make for themselves. So it's a lovely little symbiosis here, and it's a mutual symbiosis where both partners, both the insect and the nematodes, benefit. There are some nematodes that can infect humans and have a life cycle in the human gut and can actually be quite harmful and even cause lots of deaths. However, this is to do with poverty. So it's usually countries that are suffering from lack of proper care and proper hygiene, lack of sanitation, as the nematodes actually get distributed through feces and then enter the human body. But some thought to be parasites turn out to actually be beneficial because they alter the way that bacteria in the gut of frogs and humans ferment food. And it turns out to be a very beneficial symbiosis, and they live there in our gut and in the frog's gut and provide benefit. And they actually increase the probiotic bacterial growth, the growth of probiotic bacteria. And this has been revealed to be a great autoimmune disease treatment of many gut conditions. So this is quite interesting. Just a really lovely way to see how these organisms have adapted to the various animals they live in and the various relationships that they might have with other animals. There are also other ecological interactions that might not particularly be based on direct symbiosis between animals, but via the plant, the interactions between soil organisms and organisms that feed on plants and the organisms that feed on the organisms that feed on plants are engaged in very interesting, complex, and fruitful interactions. So for example, when a complex community of nematodes is present in the soil, that has an effect on aphids that actually feed on plants, because that's what aphids do. They love sucking the sugars out of plants. And when the nematode community is complex, the aphid breeding numbers get reduced, and also there is an increase in parasitoid wasps, and these are wasps that actually lay their eggs in aphids and therefore reduce the numbers of aphids. So these organisms that parasitize parasites are called parasitoids. So when this complex nematode community is present, the offspring of aphids is reduced by 31% on various plant species. And in this case, 2 species were used to examine this phenomenon. And when nematodes plus other beneficial soil microorganisms are introduced or inoculated into the soil, this decreases aphid populations, but also decreases parasitoid mortality and increases parasitized aphids. So that means that the control of aphids via the parasitoid wasps is increased as a result of healthy soil ecosystems, so nematodes and microorganisms being present in a healthy soil. And you can read the results of the study, and I've got a reference there. But basically, this is an example showing the importance of complex nematode community within the soil and how that affects plants because of the herbivorous animals that feed on those plants and their reduction via the effect of parasitoids that feed on the animals, in this case aphids that feed on the plants. So this basically shows the benefit of complex nematode community to plant health. So this is just another way of demonstrating the complexity of the ecological interactions that occur in soils and the necessity for biodiversity of soil organisms that are then translated into above ground plant biomass or plant health and the plant-animal interactions. So we've come to the end of lesson 7.1, and in lesson 7.2 we will start talking about the ecological functions of nematodes in soils. I'll introduce the different feeding groups of nematodes, and we'll start looking at the bacterial feeders as the first group of soil nematodes. Okay, so you'll be hearing from me again in lesson 7.2. Bye for now.